Welcome to Reddit Aliens. If you've ever experienced anything paranormal, what was it like? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My brother and I, aged 12 and 9, were in sleeping bags in a spare guest room of my aunt's. She had just moved in, and we were there to help unpack. It was well into the night, so we were asleep in the dark room. My eyes shot open because something was in the room. I didn't see it, but it felt like something was standing between my brother and I. Before I could think what I should do next, it started shouting down at us, guttural gibberish, loud and angry. I start screaming my head off. My aunt bursts in and yells, "What's going on?" And my only response is to scream, "Turn on the effing light!" Nothing was there. It was quiet. My brother was curled up in a ball at the bottom of his sleeping bag. We went back to sleep, trying to convince myself that my brother had talked in his sleep or something. We never talk about it again. Fast forward, my brother is about to leave for the Marines boot camp, having a beer and just chatting. He asks me if he can bring up a random thing that's always bugged him and proceeds to tell his memory of that night. According to him, never having heard my version, describes waking up to me screaming and something that seemed to be floating above us yelling at us in some weird language he had never heard before. Said he just wanted to get that off his chest before going off to war. Well, F is pretty much the only thing I could respond with. My son has an imaginary dog called Banjo. The creepy thing is that Banjo was the name of our family dog a long time ago when I was still a preteen. We lived on a farm close to a river. One day there was a flash flood and my brother was trapped on a rocky hill with raging flooding river all around him, and farm animals could be seen being swept away by the current. Our dog Banjo unfortunately jumped in the river to save my brother, but got carried away by the current and we never saw him again. After 11 hours, the water was safe enough for a boat to collect my brother, and he was beside himself with sadness over what happened to Banjo. My brother sadly died after being hit by a car while cycling 2 years later when he was 13. I never told my son about Banjo, so I was very shocked when he began interacting with this invisible dog called Banjo. Is it just coincidence? Or is it the spirit of my long-dead brother, or the spirit of the long-dead Banjo, who is visiting my new family? I hope so. This happened about 7 years ago at my high school graduation party. Rather than rent a venue, my father managed to rent a historical house for the day for free, since he used to volunteer there. It had a nice yard where the party was held, and the interior was furnished to look like it did in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the same time period when the semi-famous historical figure who owned the house would have lived there. I had been inside the house many times and honestly loved it. It felt like going back in time. Anyway, I was showing my high school friends and some cousins around the house. We gave people impromptu tours as a party activity. I was wrapping up the tour on the second floor when I suddenly noticed an open door in one of the bedrooms. It caught my eye because it was always locked, so I figured it was a maintenance closet or something. Not only was it open now though, but the light was on, suggesting someone was in there. I instantly felt uneasy, since my father had stumbled across a homeless man in one of the town's historical homes about a year earlier. They had broken into the house to escape a winter storm and were hiding in one of the bathrooms. What if someone had broken into this house before we arrived and were trying to hide in the maintenance closet? I considered telling my father, but decided to investigate instead, since there were about 7 of us, making me feel a little safer. Turns out the door wasn't a maintenance closet at all, but instead led to a long, narrow hallway that ran along the length of the house, like a secret passage that connected the 2 bedrooms. My friends and cousins followed me inside. We made it about halfway through when I noticed another door to my left. This was weird, because from my understanding of the house's floor plan, there was no way the door could lead anywhere, unless it was a narrow closet or something. I decided to open it anyway, just to make sure no one was hiding in there. The door opened easily to reveal the darkest room I had ever seen. It was so dark that you couldn't even see an inch in front of you. It was also freezing. No one wanted to investigate further, saying it was too creepy, but my cousin C and I were curious, so we took a step forward to look inside. I still had one hand on the doorknob though, because I was weary of a potential intruder and wanted to be ready to quickly close the door if need be. But as soon as C and I stepped forward, I felt someone tug on the doorknob, and not just a light tug. I mean, they pulled it with such force that the doorknob on my end was yanked from my hand. The door slammed shut with such a deafening bang that we all screamed. I immediately went to open it again, but the doorknob wouldn't even move this time. It still wasn't locked, but to my horror, I realized that it felt like someone was holding onto the doorknob on the other side. Terrified, I motioned to C to try and turn it, but he couldn't either. Finally, he turned to me and whispered, "Someone's in there." At this point, I knew we weren't alone, so I just screamed at everyone to run. We made it outside where my father was serving drinks. I began to tell him about the person in the hidden closet. I was only at the part of my story where we noticed the open door when my father interrupted me and said, "That door shouldn't be open. I hope you didn't go in there. It's not safe." I told him we went in, but when we opened the closet door on the left, someone slammed it shut. I remember my father's eyes widening as I said this. He looked extremely troubled. I asked him if he thought it was a homeless person like before, but he said it was impossible. When I asked why, he said, "That door doesn't lead to a room or a closet. It opens into the old chimney. If you had stepped inside, you would have fallen 3 stories and ended up in the basement. That's why we always keep that hallway locked. I don't know who could have gone in there. I have the only key." At that point, I just remember C and I looking at each other in utter confusion. On the one hand, it made sense now why the room was so dark. There was no floor, so the light from the hallway had nothing to illuminate when we looked inside. It also explained why it was so cold. But if there was no floor, how did someone slam and hold the door shut? Disturbingly, my father also said that the chimney was sealed off decades ago when the house was relocated to the center of town, with the second floor door acting as the only way in or out. Apparently, the law required that there be access to the chimney for future home inspections, so they couldn't seal it off completely. In other words, they literally wouldn't have been able to retrieve our bodies unless someone rappelled 3 flights down the narrow chimney to get us. Even if we somehow survived the fall, we probably would have succumbed to our injuries before anyone had a chance to get down there. I still stand by the fact that I felt someone pulled the door shut. C also backs me up and says that he knew he felt someone holding onto the doorknob. We often joke that it was a ghost who wanted to prevent us from being stupid and falling to our deaths, but I still have no logical explanation for it. When I was about 12 or 13, I had a friend spend the night. We spent a good part of the night watching YouTube and telling scary stories before I offered to go make us some popcorn and some sweet tea. It's the South, a must-have. My house was relatively small, and the kitchen was co-joined with the dining room. My grandmother kept a large china plate display in the dining room, and through it you could see the entire kitchen reflected in it. While I was pouring our tea, I glanced over at it and the reflection standing behind me, which didn't make sense, as my grandmother kept her folded-up treadmill in that spot, was the tallest woman I've ever seen, with long black hair to match, no face. Scared me so bad my legs gave out and I screamed my friend's name. The house was dead silent. My dog didn't even come, so I scooped up the tea and popcorn and scrambled back to the bedroom. When I got there, I was angry she hadn't answered when I called out to her. I had a small house and there was no way she didn't hear me, but she swore up and down that she didn't and was confused. When I explained what had happened and described the scary figure in the reflection, she broke down, I'm talking sobbing, and kept saying, "It follows me everywhere." Needless to say, the subject was dropped and I didn't invite her back over. Never seen such a clear reflection like that since, and I'm just glad it went back home with her, whatever it was. When I was a kid, our dog went missing one night. It was already dark and a storm was coming. My parents decided we would grab some flashlights and go look for him. We drove down the road and parked off the side and just started calling his name. My sister and I walked into a big field and a lady just appeared out of nowhere. She had a dress on and she was holding an old lantern. She asked us what we were doing. We told her we were looking for our dog. She told us to get off her property. We started to walk away and she just disappeared right in front of us. My sister and I knew we saw a ghost. We found out later that field we were in was an old graveyard. Most of the tombstones were knocked over and broken. To this day, nobody believes us. We know what we saw that night. Nobody in my family really believes in anything supernatural. However, I either wasn't born yet or in a bouncer, so 35 plus years ago. My brother was maybe 4 or 5 and playing in the classic red, yellow little car that was huge in the 80s. My dad was not home and my mother was in the kitchen with a big archway. We had a very large wooden table with a leaf and 2 full benches in the dining room, very heavy. My mom, still to this day, swears on that day she was washing dishes and turned around and the table with the benches was barricading the archway. No sound or noise. She thought my dad was messing with her and put it back. He then came home and was in the basement and thought she was crazy. She then went back to washing and it barricaded again. She yelled for him, and after they put everything back, she refused to go back in the kitchen and nothing ever happened again, but it's still unexplained. We're talking a 300-pound plus table, plus 2 3-person benches. The only thing I remember hearing was my gran a few days before she died said she felt a pat on her butt in bed, which my grandfather used to do. My cousin thought it was him telling her it's okay and to let go and go to heaven. I'm atheist, however, it was odd to me just the same. Not a ghost story per se, but it was definitely something that I can't explain. To paint the picture, it was about 1999. I was a sophomore in high school. I was supposed to hang out with my best friend Mark, who was a junior one day. He had a car, so the plan was for him to come by the house and pick me up. His dad was an exec for Boeing and had been up in Canada for work for about a month on a project. I paged him, waited a bit, but didn't get an answer. I called from our kitchen phone to his house and his mom answered the call. I asked if he was home and she replied that he wasn't and to try paging him. I told her that I had and that I hadn't heard from him yet. She was fairly dismissive and said something to the effect of, "I'm sure he's just out getting gas or something. I'm sure you'll hear from him soon." The moment I hung up the phone with her, I turned to my mom, who was also in the kitchen with me, and said to her matter of fact, "Mark's dad died." My mom gasped and said, "What? What do you mean?" What did she say? I just replied, "I don't think she knows yet." She yelled at me and said, "You don't know that stuff. Quit saying things like that." And I just replied, No, he's dead." She didn't respond to me, but left the kitchen. A couple of hours later, the doorbell rings. I answer, and it's Mark. He's got tears in his eyes, looks at me and says, "My dad's dead." I just responded with, "I know, shouldn't do that," and we hugged while he cried. I've thought about that moment for the last 20 plus years. I'm a sane, rational person, but I have no explanation for it. The family didn't get the call about his passing until after we spoke. I just somehow knew that he was gone. I wasn't sad, I didn't feel anything. My mom and I never spoke about it or asked me how I knew before everyone else. In case anyone was curious, he died in a car accident up in Canada. Years ago, I honestly forgot how many, I had a bad breakup from a long-term relationship. I rented this half of a duplex that about half was still under construction, but it was available, so I kinda didn't care at the time. I was reading in bed one night upstairs, not too late, like 9 to 10 p.m., when all of a sudden, it sounded like someone stomping up the stairs, but it stopped like third step down from the top. I'm freaked out. The cats are freaked out, and we're just staring at the top of the stairs, but there's no one there. A million thoughts are racing through my mind. I'm just kind of frozen, not sure what to do. Finally, I form a semi-coherent thought and say, "Whoever you are, you're not welcome here, move on." Then I heard heavy steps going down the stairs, not stomping, but could still tell not happy. After a few, I went down to double check the door was locked just in case, which it was, with the slide bolt no less. I would like to say that's the only time it happened, but it happened about 4 more times in the 2 months I was there. I was evicted because the duplex was deemed unsafe living conditions. I have a family of 4 people, my mother, my father, me, and my brother. For studies, my brother was somewhere else, so we were only 3 people in the home. I always wanted my own room, so as my brother went to college, I got his room. My father had a habit of checking me every night if I have slept or not, and usually I was not able to sleep quickly. It usually takes me about 1 to 2 hours to get asleep. Whenever my father sees me not sleeping, he always asks the reason and all. Once, when I went to sleep surprisingly, I slept quickly, but I woke up at 2 a.m. I was not able to sleep again for 10 to 15 minutes. Suddenly, there was someone at the door in the shape of my father. He enters my room, but I was not able to recognize him because he was looking totally dark. And as I said, whenever I am not able to sleep, he asks me the reason. But this, he just walked away. But rather than going to his room, he went to the kitchen. I thought he is hungry or maybe thirsty. I was also thirsty, so I went there. There was no one. I checked the balcony. He was not even there. Then I checked my parents' room. He was sleeping. It is impossible to sleep in like 1 minute. In the morning, I asked both my parents if they were there in the night. Both disagreed.